Hi, I'm Rich Colgard, former publisher of Forbes, and now its editor-at-large and columnist. In my recent book, Late Bloomers, I explored the science of how we find our hidden strengths and use them to learn and succeed at our own pace. Today's guest is Christopher Reich, who did just that. At age 37, Chris left the world of banking to pursue his dream of becoming a spy novelist. Now, 13 books later, many of which made the New York Times bestseller list, Chris is here to tell us how he did it and what it was like. Well, welcome to Late Bloomers Revolution, Chris Reich.
It's great to be here, Rich. Nice to see you.
Well, your story is so fascinating, becoming an international thriller novelist, but it wasn't. Tell us how, when you had graduated from Georgetown University, that you spent that summer imagining you were Ernest Hemingway, and almost no words came out on the page. How did you get from that, that kind of been a really confidence-inspiring experience. How did you get from there to actually writing your debut novel that made the New York Times bestseller list and shocked you with the size of the advance you got?
It was, I think it planted a seed. I always loved Ernest Hemingway more as a character, really, than as a writer. I mean, of course, I loved his early books and took them to heart, but it was his life, how he lived, such a larger-than-life character. And so I was thinking, my gosh, I don't know if I can write like him, but I would certainly like to live like him. So, Rich, that's what I took to heart. And sadly, at that young age, you can't just want to enjoy their success. He had to work hard to get there. So I didn't really know exactly how to do that then. And so I was an economics major at Georgetown. I didn't take one English class there. I had no real preparation for this. So, when I graduated, it wasn't really with the idea of, I'm going to go to the Iowa Writers Workshop, or I'm going to just stop and then write a book. By the way, I'm a big believer that to be a good novelist, it takes life and experience and just maturity, which few people have at a younger age, certainly at age 21. So yeah, it was something, but I tucked it aside. I put it inside me. Like I said, it was a seed. And I thought, if ever one day the opportunity comes, wouldn't I like to do that?
And so you did almost the opposite. You became a banker, but you had describe another experience that before you moved to Switzerland and worked for the Union Bank of Switzerland, you were sort of rudely rejected on a job interview with First Boston.
It was, I'll go back a step to make the story even funnier. So when I was at Georgetown, I was an economics major. And my senior year, I took a class, Financial and Securities Markets. And let me say that I did not graduate, sadly, at the top of my class. I got, I'll say gentleman's B average. But in that particular class, I got my one and only in my entire life, D. I was not paying attention. I got a D in financial and securities markets. So naturally, my first job out of college was stockbroker. And so I went from there to about 2 years in, I had a great client. He said, Chris, he goes, you're a very nice young man. You tell a good joke. You're very personable, but you don't know anything about the stock market. He goes, you better get to business school pronto. Luckily, he knew one of his best friends was George Kosmetsky, one of the founders of Teledyne, and then one of the big patrons and later dean of the University of Texas Business School. And I took my GMAT or GRE, and then I quickly went to UT Business School, and that's when I got serious. I said, okay, enough's enough. And I went to UT, and I got out with a 4.0. And back then, remember, Rich, this is 1986, 87. The movie Wall Street, my favorite movie. I always say, when I saw that movie, Gordon Gekko was my hero. It's like, I'm going to be like him. I wonder where this is.
I think Gordon Gekko launched a million wannabes, probably completely unlike what the movie had intended to accomplish.
I took the wrong lesson entirely. It's like, well, he'll do a couple of years, but he will have a few $100 million in the bank.
Yeah. You get to walk
I think
along
all of
the
us,
beach with your own mobile phone, brick though it might have been.
it's so funny how time passes. It's very hard at this day and age to remember what we were feeling back then in the 80s. And that whole 80s ethos was, business, power suits, make a lot of money, look good with a haircut. I mean, the idea of kind of help thy neighbor, which is very much now, thank goodness, was not even present. It was very much ego driven, and I bought into it. And I apologize to my daughters every day. It says, yes, your daddy was a craven kind of jerk, and but live and learn, right? So I went to business school, and then to get back to your question, about 3 of us got picked for that coveted interview at Goldman, back then at Solomon Brothers. Hello, John, good friend, at First Boston. And I remember I got an interview at First Boston. And I remember getting there, and I was so excited. I got a new haircut. Spent literally, I was on my own dime then, last of my money on a nice suit, and walking down the halls of First Boston. And if they have these kind of red maroon carpets, and they have all these models of sailing ships on the wall, like the HMS Constitution and the Bonham Richard. And it's like, you really feel like you're part of American history there, right? Because they financed American history. And I remember I sat in the room with the interviewer. He goes, Chris, we are so happy to have you here. I want to congratulate you on your stellar work record. Very impressive. He goes, but we have no intention of hiring you. I said, what? He goes, Rich, this was literally 5 days after the crash of 1987 on Wall Street. And, at that age, you're so into yourself. And I didn't realize, he says, we love the University of Texas, but we're hiring from Harvard, Stanford, Northwestern, and Wharton. So that was that.
Yeah. Well, that was kind of why I wrote my own book, Late Bloomers, and why I'm doing this video series, is that the pressure we're putting on kids, if anything, is worse today, far worse than it was even then. And it was pretty bad. And I think that Wall Street and Silicon Valley have set this example. It's the belief in the 800 math SAT and all wisdom and character, that comes along with it, and the proper degree and so on. But working for a Swiss bank in Switzerland doesn't sound like a bad runner-up prize.
No, it wasn't. Well, it wasn't bad. First of all, I am Swiss. I have a Swiss passport. My father, his name is Willy Wolfgang Reich. And, at least I knew going in that I should have a backup plan. But just remember back in the day, so I was dreaming of Wall Street, like we talked about, reference that movie. And but I put in my application to UBS. And I think I asked some friends there, some kindred spirits. But the difference, Rich, was the first year's salary at First Boston back in January of 1988 was $85,000 to start, $5,000 clothing bonus, $5,000 moving bonus. Pretty sweet, right? And then I got the offer from UBS Geneva, $45,000 US. Pay your way over here, buddy. And Geneva's the most expensive city in the world.
So, but did you feel like you succeeded, or did you burn out on it quickly? I mean, when did you decide that this was not for you? And there's
first of all, when I arrived, of course,
a wonderful story.
I was so enthusiastic, and I loved it. It was like, my gosh, it was exciting. Back in that day, when you went to Switzerland, you really felt like you were far away, which is a feeling I love these days. I remember the first thing I bought when I got my apartment there was a small TV. And I worked hard, and I came home on a Friday night at 7:00 and said, oh, hey, what's on TV, right? So I got like a beer and a nice sandwich. And back then there was 3 channels. There was Yas, that is Swiss Bridge, soccer, and soccer. So that was it. That was my 3 choices. I said, welcome to Switzerland. And, but it was the best decision I ever made to be over there, because all these things is like kind of the law of like contrarianness. It's like, you don't think it's going to work out. Of course, it's the best thing. If you kind of believe at all that there's some kind of force, which I come and go with, guiding you here and there, this is what was meant for me. But to your question, when did I realize I didn't love it? So I spent the first 10 months in private banking, which was important because that ended up being the fuel for my first novel, Number to Count. But I was into, as we talked about Wall Street, mergers and acquisitions. I wanted to make the big bucks. I wanted to just live inside of a 20-story building for the next 12 years and walk out with $20 million, okay? Doesn't work that way in Switzerland. They don't have big bonuses. And interestingly, they barely had an M&A department at UBS back then. So they brought me over, and I remember getting there, and here's a quick little digression. Swiss bankers have something called the hot phone syndrome. They are afraid to pick up a phone and cold call someone. Well, my first job out of college was a stockbroker at Oppenheimer and Company in Century City in Los Angeles. Hello, Joe Pollock, my former boss, Dennis Christensen. And they would come and they would say, all right, I was on rookie row. It's like 9 little cubicles in a row. They say, okay, we have 50,000 shares of Redmond Industries. Oh my God, I think that's the real name. We have to unload in 3 hours. First guy that sells the most gets a night on the town in a limousine. It's like, welcome to high finance.
Almost straight out of the movie Wall Street too. I mean, that attitude. But that wasn't Switzerland. But you discovered that you were really good at writing pitch books.
It was so back to Switzerland. Thank you. So I knew, when did I know? Rich, I knew in about 72 hours that there were some people that were a lot smarter, a lot more driven, and a lot more gifted in that real ability. And let's say it really is an ability in M&A to really be able to value companies and to sit there and sift through those balance sheets and find those critical numbers that indicate, is that price earnings multiple valid? Can we ask our client to pay $3 billion instead of $2 billion, stuff like that. And it just didn't really turn me on. It was just like, I'm sitting here in front of a screen for 12 hours, drinking too many Diet Cokes. I did not feel good. And I just realized, no, I had followed the false prophet. I had followed the false prophet of mammon, make your money. And it's like, I realized it was like, it really was a gut punch. It's like, why are you here? It's like, you don't like this. I mean, Goldman Sachs has a great saying. They say, you're going to make a lot of money, but your grandchildren are going to enjoy it. Because, Goldman, you don't go home.
Yeah.
You don't go home.
Yeah.
But even you may go for dinner and they take you back. But
yeah. But even in the Swiss banking structure, the prospects of making money weren't what they were in go-go US and
not even close
in the 80s and early 90s, as you described. Well, one other. Well, tell us about when the head of UBS, Union Bank of Switzerland, said you had a gift for writing, which was sort of a thin read, but it meant a lot to you at the time.
It did. Thank you for remembering that. It was so funny. So, as we were saying, I knew that I was not good, Rich, at finance, and sadly, my colleagues knew it too. So they said, Reich, you have to write the deal books. So if anyone who's watching,
it was probably the meeting where you said, "Excuse me, what does it mean when the numbers are in parentheses?"
Exactly. What is that?
In your career.
What is that sigma sign? Is that sum? I didn't know anything. So it's so funny. And they said, you have to write these books. And deal books and M&A they're like Encyclopedia Britannica. They're the volume B to C, and they're dry, they're terrible. So they gave me these things, and I would sit there and go, okay, if I'm going to spend a whole weekend in here writing this thing, I might as well try to make it, what I'd like to read. So I wrote these things a little bit, flippantly, but more fun. And then I'd done a couple of these, 3 or 4. And this is like 9 months down the road. I get a call. It's like, ding, ding. It's like, oh, Herr Reich. I said, "Ja, ich bin Herr Reich." It's Swiss, it's Zurich, And he goes, "The chairman of the bank would like to speak with you." And it's like, it's kind of like hearing if the FBI wants you. It's either good or really bad. So I got my hair combed and I went to his office. And the chairman came up to me and he goes, "Hike," he goes, "I have read your book." I said, "My book?" He goes, your deal book." He goes, "My God," he goes, "it was very entertaining." I said, "Really?" And he puts his arm around me. And I want to preface this. The last time the chairman of a Swiss bank smiled was when the dinosaurs roamed the earth. And he put his arm and said, "Hi." He goes, "You are our own Michael Crichton." And I said, "Thank you very much." And for some reason, I mean, of course, it's kind of obvious, that stuck. That moniker is like, gosh, I don't, he didn't know that I had read Ernest Hemingway, and yet there it stuck and it went down deep. And so it was a nice comment.
Yeah. And briefly, before we get to what has made you famous and set you on a course that I think so many people imagine they would like to do for themselves, which is to be an international thriller writer, novelist. You started a watch company in Switzerland. I mean, a good writer doesn't fall into cliches. It seems like, starting a watch company in Switzerland is a little bit of a cliche, but you made a certain success out of it. But then again, you discovered that it wasn't what you really wanted to do.
Well, I needed to earn a living, and it wasn't ready at the age of 32 to quit and then, to try my luck writing books. It wasn't even in my mind. One of my clients, so I left UBS and joined a small corporate finance boutique. So whenever you hear the word corporate finance boutique, beware. Because we were just trying to raise money and finance all these different projects. But boy, it was a learning experience. And again, it's that American can-do attitude, which I don't think other countries have. We are just brought up in this great country to think, we can do anything. Believe in yourself, be honest, and it's going to happen. And I took that and then was working with some Hong Kong electronics firms and watch companies. And I was working first doing these licensing agreements with Claude Montana and LVMH, these Louis Vuitton, Moet Hennessy, the most luxurious companies. And I had to earn a buck. So I had this idea, Rich, coming from West Los Angeles, Westwood actually. And do you remember Giorgio Beverly Hills perfume? Do you remember that, yellow and white?
I don't personally, but I think
you have to.
Remember Giorgio in Beverly Hills, yeah.
Yeah, that was Georgia. That was all your girlfriends wore that perfume, and it was an intoxicating perfume. One of the great business successes of all time. So I was doing these licensing agreements with watches, and I said, okay, let's do one with Giorgio. So I set up the whole deal, and I went to my Hong Kong people, and I said, we have this deal with Giorgio Beverly Hills. There's one thing. I have to be head of it. And they said, well, okay, we don't have anybody else in mind. It might as well be you. So I did that for the next 5 years. I set up and ran Giorgio Beverly Hills timepieces myself with Linda Loray, who was the head of Giorgio, then later became head of Fredericks of Hollywood and had a gigantic financial success with that. And so we did this watch company, and I loved it. I said I did my best to build it up and then to run it into the ground.
We were up to 50 employees at a time. But now let's move to this idea where you really did ultimately make the pivot and you blossomed. And describe that and describe the importance that you've written about of giving yourself enough time when you decided that you wanted to be a novelist, that you, unlike, that sort of post-undergraduate foray where you sat in the attic of your frat house and sweated out and trying to be Ernest Hemingway. This time, you were, a person in your middle or late 30s, and you went about it pretty deliberately. Can you describe that? Because I think it's such, for people who are looking to blossom into something, from something into something better, you know, how you went about this was very deliberate, particularly around the idea of giving yourself enough time.
Well, that word deliberate is the best word you could have chosen. That's what I was. And, you know, you're at a certain age, I was newly married, and I knew that this next step was important. And so I didn't want to treat it just, you know, lightly, casually. And so, you know, I think we can all look, and especially for late bloomers, and I really believe this, that life has given us all signs and indications of where we might be or should be and how we should act and comport ourselves. And I knew this, said, well, you know, frick, that investment banking thing didn't really turn out like I thought it was, but it taught me something. It taught me the value of hard work and long hours, and that you can get anything done, even in a short amount of time, if you try hard. So here I was, I'd never taken an English class, never written a short story, saying, you're going to be a writer. Well, how does one accomplish this? Okay, how do you do this? Well, you know, the first lesson or first rule, like Mark Twain might say, is, you know, apply back of pants to seat of chair, which really means knuckle down. And that's what I learned, Rich, from investment banking is, you know, I don't know if I made use of every of the 14 hours a day I was there, but I made enough of them. And I made the commitment to my craft, commitment to my job, that I was going to do my best to see this out. So when I made the decision, it was an earnest decision.
Which included working almost, working from minimally from 9 to 5 every day, as if you were going into an office.
Oh, I worked more than that. I worked, and I'm an early riser. So I was at my desk at 7, and I was just driven. It's like, I can't fail. You know, I told too many friends, oh, I want to write a book. I mean, all your friends laughing their face off, like trying to hold themselves. I mean, who makes it as a writer? Who? Nobody, you know? And, you know, and to be honest, I didn't want to be some mid-list or like a literary. I said, I want to be a best-selling writer. And so how did I do this, right? So, and I think this applies to across the spectrum of skills and, you know, different, whatever you want to, textiles, computers, whatever. I said, okay, I want to be a writer. How am I going to do this? Like I said, I never took an English class, and no one taught me. Oh, my Swiss banker said I'm a good writer. Really? How's that going to help? So what I did was I said, I want to write this kind of book. So I selected 3 of my favorite writers, 3. So I took Frederick Forsyth,
Day of the
John
Jackal,
McCarray, and Ken Follett. Yep. Pardon me?
Day of the Jackal.
Day of the Jackal.
Yeah.
I mean, come on. That's one of the greatest books ever written.
Yeah. The assassination plot against de Gaulle. Yeah, the reason I'm talking to you today is I'm such a consumer of great thriller novels, and that was the one that really hooked me into the genre.
I think both of us at that young age, when we were teenagers, we read that book. It's like, my God, you know, he took a fictitious story and made it so realistic. See, he was a journalist. He was a reporter. And he used that repertorial delivery that when you're reading his book, it's like, this has to be true. This has to be true, you know, and I love that. So I took that as an example, and Ken Follett, who I like even more, is a great just fiction author. And Ken Follett is the master of the declarative sentence. I mean, his books are just every, 10 words, 12 words, 8 words. His books just boom, 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 boom. This is what happened. This is what happened. And so anyway, my point is that I kind of just copied those books. I didn't plagiarize them. I said, how does he tell the story? Where does he start on chapter 1? It's like, I certainly don't know, but he does. So I use those as an example. And I think that when people are changing careers or starting something new, it's like, I always say, find whoever you thought is the best at what you do and what you want to do, and kind of copy them. Say, it didn't go wrong for them. It might not go wrong for you, but, try twice as hard as them.
Yeah. In fact, I was just reading over the holidays, Garrison Keillor's memoir. and he talked about making the movie on Lake Wobegon with Robert Altman.
Mm-hmm.
And, he'd never written a screenplay. And Robert Altman says, yeah, don't take a screenplay course or anything like that. He says, rewatch your favorite 5 movies of all time and figure out how they did it.
Well, no truer words. No truer words. And I love Garrison Keillor. I mean, talk about late bloomers. He became a dad at age 60 something.
Yeah. And he seems like a genuinely happy, fulfilled person too. One of the things you discovered was, describe the thrill of actually getting your first book accepted and the size of the check that sort of instantly let you know that whatever you had done up to your life at that point, it all added up and you were now in the sweet spot of where you were meant to be. It
was a gratifying moment, to say the least. But I think you have to go back and say, how do you get there? So, I quit work. I started writing this book, and I'm a big believer that there's never a moment where the muse alights on your shoulder and you say, oh, inspiration has come. No, writing is a slog. It is, you sit there, and if you don't get the idea, you don't leave. You don't go, oh, I think I'll play 9 holes of golf or shoot some baskets or hit the gym. You sit there at your desk. I always say it's amazing what doesn't come to you when you stare at a white wall for 8 hours. You can't give up. You cannot give up, and it will come to you. So I spent, months and months and months writing this book and getting an agent. And then, the fun story is, so I got this agent in May of 1996. Richard Pine, still my agent, a brother. And, I'm thinking, I got this agent. I remember, Rich, this is funny. I got the agent. He called me, he goes, Chris, because I just heard that I have to go back, that we had a divine angel, the author James Patterson, who then was the chairman. Talk about late bloomers, Rich. He was chairman of J. Walter Thompson Advertising Agency. He was not a writer. He was not the famous Patterson. Back then, the famous Patterson was Richard North Patterson, who'd written this book, Degree of Guilt, which sold like 5 million copies. It was the book in 1994. And Jim Patterson, or as we call him in my house, St. James, he is really one of the best human beings you'll ever meet. He took the time to read some pages that I managed to get to him, and he called his agent, Richard Pine, and said, this guy's the next, like Robert Ludlow. So anyhow, James Patterson, thank you again.
He's another example of, he pivoted from extraordinary success to supernatural success as a novelist. But again, to Mark Twain's adage that you stick your butt to the seat of the chair. I mean, even when he was chairman of J. Walter Thompson, he was getting up at 4:30 in the morning to write his novels.
That's his personality. When you meet him, you'll see he's driven. He cannot sit still. In fact, that's what's so interesting, and how kind of life defines how you're going to be successful. So he was chairman of one of the greatest, top 5 ad agencies in the world. And even so, he said, even with this workload, I think I'll get up and still, I want to tell stories. So he'd get up at 5:36 in the morning. He goes, okay, I have an hour to write. So how much can I tell in 1 hour? Well, I can tell 3 or 4 pages. And so how his life defined how his books would be told, which is these quick, chapters where something, you have to have a 3-act play in 4 pages. He did it. He mastered it. I think he wrote the rule book on it. And then, I remember when I was younger, reading up and skiing, and back when there wasn't a phone to look at when you were finished, and reading that book, Along Came a Spider, his first really big hit. It was his second book. His first book was, I'll come to me in a second, but this was his first hit, and going, this is like the best book I ever read. Of course it's not Moby Dick, but it just drew you in. It drew you in. And the point we're talking about is how the way he worked forced him kind of to adopt this style of writing, which then led to his greater success.
And he was sort of instrumental in, he introduced you to Richard Pine. Was that how it worked out? And
I got him the pages.
He's become one of the super agents in the book world. But back to this point about work, you had spent, I think you described 3/4 of a year, and you produced 600 double-spaced pages, and then the real work began. And describe how it's so important, to not let up. I mean, you'd achieved to get out a 600-page manuscript is a lot of work, but it wouldn't have made it.
Well, Rich, the point is, yeah, it's a lot of work if it's good. And so it was actually 660 pages, and out of that, probably 300 were pure crap. And so you need, again, when you're starting anew, humility. Listen to other people. You're not the be-all, end-all. You don't know everything, So like I said, I got the agent, I remember running downstairs and grabbing the want ads. And at the time, my newly married wife, we had one car. I said, I'm buying a BMW. I'm buying a BMW because we got this agent. Ha! Welcome to the real world. So 9 months, rewrite, over. I could have read that book verbatim for Book on Tape, and but that's how you learn to be an author. Anybody could write a book, but only an author, a published author, can rewrite a book. And that's where it takes the stick-to-itiveness, the grit, that just don't give up. And of course, I had this great partner, my agent and his team, Sarah Peel, these people reading this book over and over and saying, Chris, remember one time I sent in the book, Rich, and I'd always send them in. And remember this, back then, I had to get the book printed, and then send it FedEx for $50. They'd read it. There was no email back then. You could not email a book of that size, a file of that size in 1997. You couldn't. So they'd get it, they'd read it. And I remember once I sent in it again, I said, what's wrong with it now? Oh my God, I unleashed the wrath of Zeus. I said, what's wrong with it now? He goes, I have my whole team reading your book over and over to make sure it's better. He goes, you think I'm doing this because you're a bad writer? He goes, you're in the pros now. He goes, you better stiff up and shut up. He goes, we're doing this to make you the best writer possible, And I said, my God, okay, duly chastised. And we went from there.
And one of the things they pointed out was that, you really do dialogue well today, but it was not initially your strength. Talk about that.
Sorry if I laugh, and I think you're being mean to me. Rich. It was because when I first started writing, what do I know about writing? And I love books on tape. I always have. I'm a big audible.com fan. Everyone, Audible's the best. And so, but John le Carré, who recently deceased by novelist, my kind of semi-mentor, was my favorite. So every night I take a walk after dinner with my Walkman, I think back then, with the tapes on. And so I always heard this voice, this English voice in my head. So when I turned in my first book, when I turned in a numbered account, my agent, Richard Pine, said, Chris, we love this book. It reminds me of Robert Ludlum, blah, blah, blah. He goes, but just one small question. He goes, the hero. I said, yes, Nick Newman. He goes, the hero, he is Californian, right? I said, yes. He is a Marine. I said, yes. He goes, that means he's an American, right? I said, well, obviously. He goes, I said, well, what's wrong? He goes, because he talks like Sherlock effing Holmes. Thank you, John le Carré.
So you had to weed that out. How many novels have you now written since that was published in when, 98 or 99?
That was published, I think, January 23rd, not to be exact, 1998.
Okay. So
13.
Yeah. So this is your 24th anniversary, really, of the publication of your first book. And now you've written 13. And is it still as much work as it was when you wrote Number to Count?
Equal, if not more, because you never master the craft and you're always trying to get better. And every time you finish a book, I think you look back and say, oh gosh, I didn't really do that enough. And I'll tell you, novels, it's something like they only benefit from working harder at it. It's not something you can do quicker if they're going to come out better. The more time you spend, the better they turn out. So, you live and you learn, you read this and that. I always try to do my best. I can say I've never tried to phone it in. And I must say, my peers and, Daniel Silva, Michael Connolly, my superiors, they don't do it either. And they always work their butt off. And I follow them as an example. Ken followed as well. Just they always try so hard. And I think when you put your pen to page and you realize that people are going to read this and go, this is Chris Reich, you don't want to make a bad show of yourself.
Well, at your level, you become a brand. I mean, your books, people have a certain expectation about your books. You've written both standalone novels and character series. You're now writing number 3 in your Simon Risk character series. Describe Simon Risk, and then tell us, do you enjoy character series more or standalone novels?
Yeah, I think I enjoy both. I absolutely love writing this character of Simon Risk. He is everything I want to be, someone I'll never be. So Simon Risk is an American living in London. He has this garage where he fixes up, restores and renovates old Ferraris. But before, he has a very colored past. So he's about 35, 40 years old. You never want to say an age actually in a book. He's old enough to know better. How's that? He's old enough to know better. But he grew up in London. Then there were some sad circumstances. His father passed away, and he was sent to live with his mother in Marseille, France. Now, for our readers, I don't know if you've been to Marseille, but that's an interesting city. I love it. Historical, home of the Count of Monte Cristo, the Chateau d'If right out there in the water. But it is a tough town, to say the least. It is a badass town. They have a serious organized crime issue going on there. And so he went to Marseille, and quickly, he was in an unloved family in a poor part of the neighborhood, found his true calling, which was hanging out on the streets, dealing drugs, and then taking down jewelry stores, taking down armored cars, getting that feel at AK-47 in his hand. And if anyone doubts me about this, France has a version of 60 Minutes, and you can go look at how the organized crime, the gangs there, le milieu, as they say, take out the armored cars that try to get from a bank to another bank, from a bank to the French Navy in Toulon, where they have to deliver cash payrolls. You know what they do? They block the street, they surround these cars with 10 guys, and they unload with machine gun fire. And I saw this once, and I said, I can't believe I'm watching this. And I said, I got to use this in my book. So that's Simon Risk.
Well, he's a good guy, though, and but with that very mysterious past, and what an almost complete opposite of your previous character series hero, Jonathan Ransom, who we are first introduced to as a sort of one of those Doctors Without Borders do-gooder types, but he too has a past. And
and I want to say that I love Doctors Without Borders. That's one of my favorite charitable organizations. And I mean, I think the people that work there, I wouldn't really say they're do-gooders, because yes, they're doing good, but considerable peril to themselves. It's scary. A lot of them are in very, perilous places of work in Africa and the Middle East, in Yemen. My God, mortars coming in like by the minute. Afghanistan. How many hospitals got drilled by them? I mean, I can remember at least 2 offhand where they came in and killed everyone there. So yes, he's a do-gooder, but he has more of an adrenaline junkie. He needs to be where the action is, And he's a good person. I mean, he didn't, like Simon Risk, he was not exposed to the criminal element. He was trying to find himself, and he found himself in this profession of helping others, which I could say, is there anything more rewarding? I don't think there is. I mean, you want $1 million paycheck? Someone just won $1 billion lotto in the United States. You know what I thought? That's the worst thing that will ever happen to them in their life, because life's about striving, about finding things to do good. And so Jonathan Ransom, the star of Rules of Deception, Rules of Vengeance, is not a do-gooder, but to fulfill himself, he wants to help others, and he's willing to take every risk possible to do it.
Tell us what a year in the life of Chris Reich is like. I mean, you spent part of the year, probably most of the year, with your seat glued to the seat of the pant, to the working many hours, and then, but then you to keep yourself fresh and to do some firsthand reporting, you get out in the world and travel. I mean, how does it all sort of add up if you're on a produce a book every year or every 2-year cycle?
Well, it comes from growing up overseas, and my father was Swiss. As I said, my mother American, and we were in the travel business. So I spent a lot of time being sent and going overseas all during the year. And so as I progressed in my writing career, I realized that the closer I was to the subject, the better the book came out. And the best example is for my latest Simon Riss book, The Palace. I said, I want to live in the place, and I want to write that book where I'm living. Now, I'm at a certain age, my kids have grown up. Tried to be a good father and loved being with my kids, but they're in college. They don't need to see me every day. And I said, that's the best. Let's go. Let's see the world. And so the book, the latest book, The Palace, the Simon Riss #3, it opens up in Thailand. So I said, let's go. So I moved to Thailand for 3 months, and I visited every corner of the city, traveled every corner of the country. My girlfriend Laura came with me. We went to Chiang Rai by the Golden Triangle. And so I took all that stuff and said, I got to put this in, not too much, but just the telling detail. There's nothing worse than an author that over-researches a book and wants you to know it.
Yeah. But that telling detail, I think we're both fans of the late Tom Wolfe. I think it was his book, A Man in Full, that he made a very expensive trip to Tokyo and really got only one detail out of it. But he felt, at his level, he felt that it was worth the trip, even though it was just the cost, the monetary cost of that one detail. Well, how much? For somebody who hasn't written a thriller novel, how much of it comes from what you see, sort of firsthand reporting, but then also what you read? I would almost think if you're writing spy novels or military novels, you better darn well be subscribing to Jane's Defense Weekly or, Guns and Ammo or something. To have that level of detail that will be believed by your readers. And the bar has gone up. I think when we were having drinks in Indian Wells after Christmas, we were noting that if you were Ian Fleming, who created the James Bond series, just as we talk about, we're in the age of golden television today. I think we're in the age of golden thriller novels, and they really have to be researched in a way you didn't have to do in Ian Fleming's day in the 1950s when he wrote his Bond novels.
You can't get away with anything these days. And I think that's to our advantage. I remember the one comment we made, which I think is hilarious, is the cell phone ruins writing spy novels because you could see everything and have access to everything. But no, I totally agree that, when I write my books, it's like, where do you get ideas? That's like that was one of the big questions. Where do you get your ideas? Well, truth is always stranger than fiction. So I try to get my ideas from, what's going on. My last book, The Palace, came from, I read this fantastic book, The $1 Billion Whale, about this Indonesia-Malaysian guy, CeeLo, that was in Hollywood making The Wolf of Wall Street, but he got his money from his aunt pilfering the Malaysian, the funds, and stealing the money meant for the country and giving it to her son. I thought, this is really stranger than fiction. And knowing America, and not to be disparaging, but I realized that very few people will really know about this subject. They're not going to read the story in the Wall Street Journal. And it was a big story in the Wall Street Journal. So I get my inspiration from real life. and try to base things. And then, of course, fiction is about taking what's real and just amping it up a little bit and taking it to just that step where can you suspend your disbelief. And so, but I research. That's the best part of my job, Rich, is researching and reading and learning. Learning is so great. Keep on. It's like, gosh, just keep on top of all this stuff. And it's hard these days because there's so much information coming at you from every angle. Goodness me, how am I supposed to know all of it? But it's out there, and if you look, you will find it.
A couple of questions about the mechanics of your writing, and then I think we're close to wrapping this up. Do you outline or plot out your novels, to the finish in the beginning?
No.
So how do you approach it then?
I usually approach it with having an idea for the start. There has to be some kind of idea. The book I'm writing now, it's called Once a Thief, Simon Rispor, starts with a stolen gearbox for the most expensive Ferrari ever made. So I just was reading, I don't know, Rich, we made a big mistake. We should have taken all our money and put it into buying Ferraris 20 years ago. We would be having our own Gulfstream 4s. Yeah. Isn't that the price of Ferraris is so exploded?
Or Mickey Mantle baseball cars, maybe, yeah.
Baseball cars, but Ferraris even more. No. Ferraris are going for $100 million for a piece of metal in a motor. You just try to wrap your hands around this. So I thought, I read this story about this big argument between these two buyers and sellers. Someone had bought a Ferrari for $80 million and said, I want my money back. You did not include the original gearbox. The gearbox costs like $5,000. But if the car is entirely original, the value skyrockets. So it was an integral part. I thought, for some reason, this is a good start for a novel because Simon Riss, fixes Ferrari. So I took that and ran with it. So in other words, who would ever think of that idea? I needed that idea from the press.
Do you write by hand or do you type?
I write longhand and to go back. I do not outline very much. I have a good idea from the beginning. I know how it's going to end, and all hell breaks loose in the middle. And that's why you have to sit there for 10 hours a day.
What's a good day's output in terms of words?
6 pages. And that's like a really good day. A really good day is 2,500 words. A bad day is under 1,000. But you just can't give up. You can't walk away. And if you sit there, and they can be crappy words, but the good thing about writing, you can always rewrite. But if you get the story moving, then you can go back, fix it, this and that's not right, bad prose, blah, blah, blah. But just don't give up and just keep at it.
Well, final thoughts on all of those. I think my good friend Jeff Leeson, who's sort of my partner in my book, Late Bloomers, and he was the managing editor who kept the trains running on time, and I was sort of the conceptual guy and did most of the writing for it. But now I've lost my train of thought. This is embarrassing.
Let me say this. When we were meeting, I read your book and I loved it, and I zoomed through it, and I got so many lessons from it. The biggest lesson is, you can start anytime. And you don't have to wait, and life is there for you to take. And so for all of us of a certain age, 30, 40, you can change, you get better. Who knows when you're going to be your best self?
Well, you anticipated my question. You rescued me from senile embarrassment here, but forgetting the question as I was halfway through it. But it does get back to this point about work and about being deliberate. And so it's good to have dreams. It's good to imagine that you're capable of blossoming, because we are all incredibly capable of new beginnings and new blossomings, but there is that deliberation and there is that commitment to work. And so what would you say for people who want to become you?
I think honesty is really the hard thing. It's like you have to realize, you have to take that gut check and say, can I do this or not? To be honest, being in this field of writing, a lot of people think they can be writers and they really can't and have no business doing it. It's a little bit like, I always say writing just with this field is like playing a musical instrument. When you play the saxophone, you either can play it or you can't. But the thing is, when you play it, when you hear it, you have to realize when you're playing it if it's good or not. A lot of people play it, it sounds terrible, and they think it sounds good. But so I think that the big thing is take a gut check and say, can I really do this? And be honest. Rigorous honesty is very hard for a lot of quests. And that's a euphemism, by the way. People know what that means. Rigorous honesty.
Yeah.
And so you got to be rigorously honest. It's like, frick. And then apply yourself. No one's going to do you any favors. But if you pass those 2 tests, believe in yourself, because everyone will tell you you can't do it. And you have to say, yes, I can.
Well, Chris Reich, thank you for a fun and inspiring conversation. And
Thank you for having me.
Now liberate you so you can spend more time writing and delight us with yet another Simon Risk novel.
Thank you, Rich.